Leila Abu Leila, our president, is sadly unable to be here this year, or happily, because she's attending a literary festival in Nairobi in Kenya. She's a very doughty supporter of literary festivals everywhere, all over this country and others. And so, we're pleased that she's doing that, but of course sad that she's not here. She told me, and she said I could say this, that she feels crushed by the war. And I know that a lot of people feel that, and we'll hope that this year's meeting will at least make a small contribution to keeping our people's hope, both in Sudan and in South Sudan, of course, and particularly in the areas of extreme conflict. But I know that, everybody in this room probably has lost somebody or knows somebody who has been killed and may have lost their house and may have lost their village, particularly obviously in Darfur, but not only. So, and in the capital. So, we hope to make a small contribution to that. There is a tobe on display outside on the table that Leila Mohamed has brought. Leila, would you just like to say is there a microphone? Oh. Yeah. Roving mic? Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, Francis.
My name is Leila.
Just to say briefly what...
Hello everybody, good morning. And on behalf of everyone in Sudan, I just arrived recently. They are sending their appreciation for your presence and for your love to Sudan. I have this piece of cloth which is started as 50 centimeter for every individual, sponsored by Waging Peace, and from different group of women. Some of them they are available around me here, and this piece end up to be like a giant top. We want it as a symbol for peace and tranquility and bring the women together. And we believe in the strength of women. We believe in their ability to do something. And the giant top is just part of that. I'm sorry, the time is very short. I need to pass it by, but please feel free and have a look. This is every square is done by a group of women or one person, and this is the symbol. Together we can do something. From one piece we made the top, from one individual together we will make a united nation of Sudan. Thank you so much, and enjoy your time.
Thank you very much, Leila. Yes, the TOB was a project of Waging Peace, the NGO Waging Peace, which of course is one of our big supporters. Unfortunately, they're not able to be here today, but they're always involved with SSS UK. So you can talk to Leila afterwards at lunchtime or during coffee breaks if you want to know more about that. But in recognition of what's happening and, to help keep hope alive, I'm now going to ask Dr. Hussama Mujama, Hussama Mujama, who's one of the founders of Sudan Doctors for Human Rights, to lead us in a minute's silence. So please stand if you're able to, and if not, don't worry, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maya. Just ask that we observe a minute's silence in the honor of lives lost in Sudan's, South Sudan, and Sudan's wars. Thank you very much, Ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you. Right, now we go to our first presentation. I'd like to call on Professors Mohamed Abdelsalam Babiker and Lutz Oette to come and join us, please. Thank you.
A very good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure, but also a sad duty, given the topic of this panel, to welcome you to our first session today. The topic of our session is Justice After Serious Violations and International Crimes Committed in the War in Sudan. I will be playing a hybrid role as a chair and also saying something of substance, I hope. So I will briefly introduce myself. My name is Lutz Oette. I'm a professor of international human rights law here at SOAS and also co-director of the Center for Human Rights Law. And I've been working on human rights law and justice in Sudan for the last 20 years or so. With me, it's a great pleasure and delight to introduce you to the main speaker, Dr. Mohamed Abdelsalam Babiker. He's a professor at the Faculty of Law, University of Khartoum, and he's also the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea. And he has published widely on human rights in Sudan, and obviously has, I think that was your PhD thesis, published in 2007, a groundbreaking book on international humanitarian law in Sudan that has now, of course, become highly topical again. Mohamed and I have actually worked on a number of publications together, be it articles, books, but also reports. And one of them is a new report published by Redress and SOAS, which is available now online. It's just been published a couple of days ago, so to which we contributed, I would say, quite significantly. And the report is called Ruining a Country, Devastating Its People, Accountability for Serious Violations of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law in Sudan since April 2015. Right, that much by way of introduction. This is how we're going to plan to run the session. I will talk for 5 minutes or so to frame the topic, and then Mohamed will speak for around 20 minutes or so before I wrap it up and open it for discussion. So I hope, given the time pressures we're under, that we will have a good half an hour for discussion. Now, in framing the topic, I first want to pay tribute to Dr. Amin Meki-Medani again. You will recall that we obviously honored his legacy before here at SSS UK. He actually had a case that Redress brought on his behalf and on behalf of Farouk Abu Essa before the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, That decision has now been published, and the African Commission found that their detention and treatment in detention actually constituted torture and ill treatment, that Sudan had violated a number of their rights. But I don't want to speak about the case as such, but I'm invoking his memory because I think, perhaps like no one other I know embodied what I think is a critical way of looking at things, because he always was able to situate the situation in a broader historical perspective, drawing lessons and then building on these lessons to set out a vision for the future of Sudan. And that's what I want to do very briefly in framing the topic, to look at some of the key issues I would argue we need to take into consideration. And here I'm talking about the twin brothers, if you like, that have blighted Sudan over recent history, and that is violence and impunity. Now, violence, of course, has been ubiquitous in Sudan, and is really political violence that has basically infested the political system, so that it dominates politics and has led to actually a proliferation of actors which, if I use sort of Franz Neumann's phrase, have been practitioners of violence. And if you look at the recent developments, I think it's very clear that this kind of violence we've been witnessing has been a continuation and culmination of what we've seen throughout Sudan's history. So I would argue that the war, even though it has a number of unique features, the indiscriminate bombings, the looting, large-scale destruction, and obviously mass displacement, is actually not exceptional when we look at the broader history in Sudan. And obviously what probably is different is that the violence has escalated so quickly from 2018 onwards. The 2019 massacres, the coup in October 21, the violent suppression of protests thereafter, and then obviously the war since April of this year. And this obviously comes at the back also of a broader history during the nearly 30 years of dictatorship of al-Bashir, where violence was really the way of doing politics. And the problem is, I think, that has really infested the whole political system, because it's not only those actors who are now at each other's throat, but you obviously also have non-state actors, rebel movements, who then use violence to get a share of the power, as Srinivasan described in his brilliant book, When Peace Kills Politics. So that kind of violence, I think, is a serious problem, because it has been reproducing itself and has become almost like systemic as part of the political system. And obviously it's closely related to structural violence as well, indirect violence, to exploitation and marginalization, because that has to be, if you like, always reproduced also through other forms of violence. And whenever people in the peripheries then don't have democratic means, they may have to resort to arms to fight for their rights. And I think that's also why what the resistance committees have done is so remarkable, that they have really tried to break that cycle of violence that has been so prominent in Sudan. Now that takes me to the twin brother, impunity. And impunity is, of course, the lack of accountability from a legal perspective, be it criminal, civil, public law. but it obviously has also broader political connotation that power comes with responsibility. And in Sudan, again, what we witnessed since 2018 was a complete lack of accountability for all the episodes of violence and violations that I mentioned. And I would argue that this lack of accountability has actually fueled the escalation of violence. And of course, that also implicates the so-called international community, because they were actually complicit in this case, sort of subordinating accountability to what they consider to be pragmatic realpolitik, because they thought that even though the actors had a history of violence, that they would be rational and pragmatic enough to come to a political solution. I mean, we all know that that was sadly mistaken. So I think accountability as a flip side of impunity is highly critical also to really reverse the logic of violence and the power asymmetries that we find in Sudan. And obviously that also means having a democratic process in place through which to address any disputes and any conflict that arises, because in the absence of that, what we see is a case of might is right. And that brings me to my final point in terms of how to address the issue of accountability and justice in Sudan. I think it's very clear that it's not a purely legal, technical matter, but it's part of a broader political process, and I think also where all the various political actors, I think, have to have a much stronger focus on that, because again, if you look at the resistance committees and the broader revolutionary movement, I think they have really been very conscious of the importance of accountability as part of the broader agenda of peace, freedom and justice, but a lot of the political actors have been remiss in that regard. So I think a sea change is needed in really developing a new culture of peace and accountability in Sudan. And that, I think the notion of transformative justice probably captures that best, which seeks to address the causes and patterns of violence. And this will be high on the agenda in any transition, which hopefully will come very soon. And that is also the cue for me now to hand over to Mohamed, because I'm sure he will be talking about transitional justice as well in his presentation. So Mohamed, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Lutz, for the introduction. Actually, I have some slides to present, but I would like to start with that 4 years ago, I guess, we launched our book here at SAWAS, immediately after the Sudanese revolution. The book actually entitled Constitution Making and Human Rights Protection in Sudan and South Sudan. And at that time I was so optimistic about the Sudanese transition, that Sudan is really, after 30 years of dictatorship, now moving from dictatorship to a democratic Sudan. And now, after 4 years, I think Sudan moved from a hope from transition to armed conflict. Reflecting on these 4 years since we presented our book, I guess the conflict now is it is a conspiracy against the Sudanese peaceful revolution by 2 generals, but the 2 generals actually representing key actors internally and also external actors, basically some regional governments and also issues related to the Sudan geopolitical location. And I think Dr. Abdelsalam is going to talk about this later, but I'm going to look at the issues related to to peace and accountability in Sudan and justice. Actually, I would like to start by looking at the actors, the military actors in Sudan. Basically, under international humanitarian law, when we look at any conflict, we look as actors. So I'd like to focus on both SAF, the Sudanese Armed Forces, and the RSF command structure. Basically, the Sudan Armed Forces command structure is very clear in terms of command and in terms of orders coming from different sectors. But also now, from my observations, there is some associated armed groups. Partially the groups who are signed the Juba Agreement, Agar forces, and also some groups in Darfur, especially in Al-Fashir, fighting with the Sudan Armed Forces, in particular SLA, Minawi, who are actually providing some protection and some coordination with staff. But the issue of the problematic issue related to the RSF is actually, it is very mobile and has its own command structure. So the central command of RSF is the traditional RSF actually created by 2017 Act, at that time supposed to be functioning under the Sudan Armed Forces. But since 2017, it developed as a force which has its own command structure, operating in parallel with the Sudanese Armed Forces. Since the start of the war, the RSF has their own central command, but they also have their own sector commands and sector commanders. And with the continuation of the war, the sector commanders, it seems that they are not in good coordination with the central command. And some information we observe and some we receive, and some information indicates that the RSF central command is no longer working in coordination with RSF sector commanders. Especially the sector commanders now become like very mobile in terms of military coordination, in terms of order, in terms of command control. And this is one of the key concerns related to the RSF command structure. And also, one of the issues related to RSF operations is related to the fact that RSF associated militias, in particular in some areas in Darfur. In particular, maybe most of you heard about the indicators of genocide in Guinea, where it is not clear about the command structure, whether the RSF committed the crimes or the associated militias. And we're going to talk about this with regard to war crimes. Of recent, now we witness that there is some mercenaries or some contractors who are actually contracted to fight in the war, some brought from Libya and some brought from other tribal groups to fight with RSF. And actually this is related to actually the policy of the staff Sudan Armed Forces. It seems that now it's actually conducting a war of attrition, trying to weaken the RSF command structure through winning time and also trying to disconnect the RSF commanders from other commanders, and also trying to move the fight from Khartoum to other places. And I think this mapping the military actors is really important with regard to the hostilities, because it's also related to the Commission of International Crimes. With regard to accountability, I'm going to talk quickly about the domestic accountability avenues and also the international accountability options. With regard to domestic accountability, in Sudan, I think there is a lot of challenges in terms of accountability related to, I don't want to talk in legal terms, but basically any accountability for the prosecution of the crimes, we need to characterize the conflict. Whether the conflict falls within international humanitarian law and international criminal law, in order for those who are actually committing the crimes to be accused of committing such crimes. Generally, in terms of substantive laws, many crimes were committed, amounts to crimes against humanity and war crimes, possibly genocide in Darfur. And I say amounting because this is an issue related to investigation. But from reports from civil society organizations, reports from the United Nations High Commissioner, also the last report submitted by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court actually confirmed that systematic and widespread crimes were committed against civilian populations. In particular, rape, sexual slavery, torture, targeting civilian populations and civilian infrastructure. And so all these crimes are actually within the scope of the crimes enshrined in the Rome Statute. And also, these crimes, if there is a proper legal system in Sudan, could be prosecuted under the Sudanese Criminal Act amended in 2009, Articles 186 to 192. And basically, I would like to refer that these amendments in 2009 basically introduced as part of the Sudanese legal system in order to affect what we call is the issue of complementarity. At that time, al-Bashir and others were actually indicted by the ICC, and Sudan introduced such kind of laws in order to preempt, as a preemptive move, not for the ICC not to be, to take what we call the jurisdiction. And also the Armed Forces Act introduced in 2007, in particular, to actually Sudan to avoid actually being the top guys, or the top fish, being prosecuted. But the problem is there is a lot of challenges with regard to domestic accountability. As you know, even after the revolution, there is no fundamental reform in the justice system. And in particular, we hope that after the revolution there will be fundamental reform with regard to the judiciary, with regard to the prosecution office, and also with regard to the other law enforcement agencies and also the security. Unfortunately, these reforms have not taken place at the time. And you remember, Lutz, in our book, we referred to the issue of accountability in 2019, that a fundamental reform needs to be in place. And I think this is one of the key failures of the transitional government to deal with the issue of accountability. And also related to the nature of the constitutional declaration, 2019, there is no system in place at the time to prosecute those who actually committed crimes. In particular, the 3rd of June massacre, which is, in my view, is amounting to crimes against humanity, and also the killing of the demonstrators after the coup in 2021, which is also the killing of 125 young demonstrators in the streets of Khartoum, which is also, if there is a proper investigation at the time, these crimes amounts to crimes against humanity, because they are systematic and also coordinated by the Sudanese armed forces and the RSF. So in terms of domestic accountability, now there's a lot of challenges at the level of evidence and also at the level of laws, at the level of laws. After the war, some measures post April the SAF set up a war crime committee in order to prosecute violations committed by the RSF. And in my view, this commission of inquiry only targets the RSF, but also turning a blind eye on the crimes committed by Sudanese armed forces, in particular targeting of civilians by airstrikes. In terms of magnitude of the crimes, there is no doubt that the RSF is actually committing a lot of crimes. Rape, pillage, looting, massively in the capital of Khartoum and also in Darfur. And there is a need for an internal committee or an internal commission to actually, or a fact-finding mission to establish the facts. But the problem is this, with this committee, is not objective, is not also independent committee. The composition of the committee includes the prosecutor, who is not actually an independent person, and also the military, some personnel from the military, and also from the intelligence. So there is questions about the independence of the committee. Also, there is issues related to RSF status, as because RSF used to be part and parcel of the Sudanese armed forces, and but now is regarded as a rebel group. In the past, RSF is like a mercenary group because normally they fight externally in the war in Yemen and receive some external support, and this is also related to some complications about the RSF. There is some issues related to international accountability, and I would like to emphasize that what happened now, currently happening now in Sudan, is similar, in particular in Darfur, to what happened in 2003. So now we're talking about 20 years of what I call it failure of accountability, not on the part of the Sudanese justice system, but also because of the what I call it the classical approach of the ICC. And basically, under international criminal law, the ICC, one of the key objectives of the creation of the ICC is to act as a deterrent mechanism. For the case of Sudan, actually the ICC failed in terms of prosecuting or actually even acting as a deterrent mechanism to prevent further crimes to be committed. And also, if you look at those who are actually indicted by the court, like Bashir and others, the court did not move anywhere with regard to the prosecution of such crimes. So now the question is, and I think this is a very key question, to what extent that the crimes committed in Khartoum and Darfur and in Kordofan can be regarded as continuous crimes, which actually will give the ICC prosecutor to investigate the crimes. I remember the prosecutor mentioned in his last report that he's going to open investigation about the crimes, however, but committed only in Darfur, not in the rest of Sudan. And I guess this is very classical in terms of only opening investigation in certain parts, while actually those who are actually committing and ordering the crimes are based in Khartoum, both the RSF and SAF. And I think this is, in my view, is a very classical approach. Civil society organizations also, after the Sierra View massacre in 2019, approached the ICC prosecutor in order to open investigation with regard to crimes committed in Khartoum. And at that time, the legal argument we provided is actually these crimes committed by the same actors in 2003. And it's actually a continuation of crimes. And also some letters were sent to the prosecutor after the coup in October 2021, asking the prosecutor to open investigation because of the magnitude of the crimes, and actually these crimes amount to crimes against humanity. But also the prosecutor did not move with regard to such kind of crimes. And now, what I call it the classical approach, you need to move from only investigating in Darfur to the other part of Sudan, including Khartoum, South Kordofan, and Darfur, the 5 regions of Darfur. And I think because, for a simple reason, the violations committed by the top commanders in the RSF and SAF, and also all violations that are actually committed anywhere in Sudan is related to the armed conflict. So I hope that with regard to international accountability options, that the ICC will move beyond the violations committed only in Darfur. As the options with regard to accountability, I also note that the Human Rights Council in its session in June is not unanimous with regard to establishing what we call the COI, a Commission of Inquiry, or International Commission of Inquiry. And as you know, because the Human Rights Council is composed of 47 member states, it is a political body. I'm actually part of, as a rapporteur, I'm part of this body. But it seems that there is no political will on the part of governments to move to establish a commission of inquiry. And last week, a session actually on Sudan, the High Commissioner provided his report confirming a lot of violations, similar to his report provided in last June, and also civil society organization also indicated that and provided a lot of reports. Also, many experts, especially rapporteurs, also thematic or provided also a lot of evidence related to torture, disappearance, arbitrary detention, bombardment of civilian populations and also civilian infrastructure. All such kind of violations are now confirmed. There's a body of evidence confirming that. Nevertheless, now I cannot see any move from the Human Rights Council or also from the Security Council or the General Assembly to move to set up a commission of inquiry on Sudan as the base for further prosecution. And I hope that civil society organization will actually put a lot of pressure and also some friendly governments, in particular the UK, in order to really move towards putting at least to move forward with regard to these crimes committed in Sudan, because in my view, these crimes are unprecedented and also are international crimes. And there is a need for some kind of measures to be taken by member states. In particular with regard to universal jurisdiction. And I hope that the UK, and I know that in this room there may be some people who are actually have some influence with regard to the policy making and also engaging with some states, the issue of universal jurisdiction. And I think this is one of the options that when we are now thinking about using universal jurisdiction in terms of that some member states who have their own laws, like for example the UK have their own Torture Act 2001, can actually, and also Germany, France, Canada, also in Africa we have Kenya, South Africa, Chad, some countries that can invoke universal jurisdiction regime to prosecute some who are actually suspected of committing international crimes. And also some countries can play a role with regard to sanctioning some members. We know that the RSF and also the Sudanese army have wealth, gold, companies outside, and I guess there is a real need for Sudanese and also some countries to address this area for the sake of prosecution, pending that Sudan that after the war there may be some move with regard to domestic accountability. Also, one of the options is the African human rights system. As Lutz mentioned, there is a case by late Dr. Amin and Farouk Abu Issa. In June, the African Commission issued a decision, but one of the problems of the African Commission on Human and People Rights is that it takes a long time, and on also the enforcement measures taken by the Commission, depending on the willingness of the concerned states. Regarding one of the last issues related to reparations, and I think reparation is one for victims of crimes, and I would like to really focus on this because what happened in Sudan really requires an important requires a project for reparation, because the magnitude of destruction and the magnitude of crimes committed in Sudan is really massive. You can imagine that a capital like Khartoum of 10 million, most of them are actually displaced, their houses are looted, they don't have any means of survival, including myself. I have my office at the University of Khartoum. I cannot access my office, and also likewise my colleagues. My home is also completely occupied by the RSF. And also we are talking about millions who cannot actually need to be compensated. And here when I'm talking about compensation, I need to talk about the 5 pillars of compensation, including material compensation, but also compensation with regard to loss of earning, loss of income, compensation for academic institutions, like destruction with regard to libraries, also archive, historical places, monuments, and also there is a need as part of the compensation of these reparations that what happened in Sudan should not actually happen again. And this requires what we call a guarantee of non-repetition. And guarantee of non-repetition, it means that military actors who are actually responsible for the war should not again resort to using weapons to settle their own differences. And this requires what we call it civilian oversights over any military action could be taken by military actors. And also we need like a public apology and also a commission of inquiry to actually establish the facts, what happened on 15th of April, because this will determine the responsibility of the actors. And accordingly, compensation should be offered to Sudanese. And I think there is also a need for a trust fund. And the question would be how Sudan, the loss of property, loss of income, loss of earning, loss of infrastructure, how this could be provided through individual compensation or through communal compensation. I know that, and you know that the actors, the RSF and the army, they have their own wealth. And this could be one of the issues we need to think about as Sudanese, how this could be one of the key demands for any peaceful settlement in Sudan. And also with regard to transitional justice. I think transitional justice, I guess it is important for political actors and political parties to actually be very clear with regard that transitional justice has to be an integral component of any peaceful negotiations. And I really hope that the international community and peacemakers will actually be this in their minds that any settlement for Sudan in the future has to take into consideration the issue of accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohamed, for really masterfully setting out the the challenges relating to accountability and justice in Sudan, both domestically and internationally. And I think there's a lot to talk about. Before I open the floor, I just want to comment on the move by the SAF to investigate the crimes committed by the RSF. Because I think what we can see here is the beginning of what we may see further is actually the sort of the politicization of accountability and justice by the actors. Obviously, the RSF also has been making certain announcements that they are committed to upholding the law, human rights, whatever. But I think here you can see how justice is then used strategically and selectively by actors to portray themselves as rational and reasonable. And of course here, there is obviously a political need for them also as a means to regain legitimacy. Because even though Mohamed has been traveling around purportedly representing Sudan, obviously we must not forget that they came to power by coup. They're not legitimate representatives. In that sense, it's highly questionable. And obviously also then any announcements made that they will investigate violations. I mean, obviously that's very partial to begin with. I think it doesn't meet even the most basic standards, but I think the political dimension is also very clear to see. All right, I will open the floor now, but I want to give, before I do that, I want to give Hussam Amjama from Sudan's Doctors for Human Rights the opportunity to talk very briefly about the role of doctors, because they have been critical not only obviously in providing for care and helping people who've been injured or in need of treatment, but also in documenting violations. So a lot of what we know about what is happening on the ground is also based on the medical evidence. So I would like to invite you to maybe say a few words about what is happening on the ground and what you see as some of the key issues.
Thank you very much, Lutz, and thank you, Mohamed Abdelsalam, for the really very useful presentation that shed light on many issues of the current situation. Obviously, with regard to what we are doing on the ground, there's a lot of challenges and opportunities as well. And I thought I would start with opportunities, is that to bring the issues of human rights violation in the forefront of people thinking, especially among the doctors in the ground, that this is an important issue that you need to know about, and you need to know how to gather information about it and how to forward the information to appropriate bodies. And we've been, even before the war, working on this issue of education of doctors and grassroots especially to take human rights violation very seriously. Obviously, doctors are trained to document, as some of us know here, Form 8, which is by and large is an outdated tool to document violation. And we know the problem with Form 8. That's much better voice-wise in terms of documentation. And so despite the war, we have been really working really hard to make sure that the flow of information comes to us and it's being gathered and documented in a proper way. And possibly when we have the means and the time, produce some report. So yeah, it is an ongoing process, but we have a lot of challenges that we needed to be overcome, and we need some help in terms of communications and training, and just more people to do the same thing. And I think this is really an important topic to look at. Thank you.
Right, thank you so much, Zam, for sharing that with us, and you can already see how much the work you and colleagues are doing in Sudan here is appreciated. So I would say we take rounds of questions, 3 questions please, but we try to keep it as brief as possible in the interest of time pressure. Hafiz, please, to begin with, and then Eddie, and then Aziz, and then we'll go this round for the second round. So please, in the interest of everyone, keep it short as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Lutz, and thank you, Dr. Mohamed Abdelsalam, for the details explanation of violations and international mechanism. I think the problem of Sudan is the violations is like become like a culture, and it's not only started recently, it's since 1955 continuously. And I think the main, and why is it escalated to 610, that because of the counter-insurgency policies of the government. And that started in 1985 after the attack on Garuda Bredeme, I think by SPLM. And it became a culture. And even most of these militias, and which is turning up to become rapid support forces, one of the deal is for them to go and kill and loot. And even there is a saying in these tribal militia saying, if you want, if you want to marry, then you have to join the militia. Then the main issue is go there, loot and kill, and it become like a culture. And I think that is the problem. I think all the governments doing since Sudan independent are responsible, even the democratically elected in 1986 because the DN massacre is one of the examples. I think how are we going to address that? And how are we going to change the culture of SAF and all the other militia which is being recruited? And what happened in Khartoum, it's been happening a long time ago in other parts of Sudan. Now people in Khartoum have seen it, how the violation and how these militias act. I think that's something that need to be addressed.
Yeah, thank you. Eddie?
Thank you so much for an excellent presentation. I've got a question about the torture system in Sudan, and I'd really be interested to hear your views about it. I was very interested, Dr. Mohamed, by you saying this is a conspiracy against the revolution, and and the way that you detailed that it was organized around command structures. I found that very helpful. But my question is this conspiracy based on generalized terror, or is it targeted counter-revolutionary violence that looks to attack specific civil or revolutionary groups? And I think very often you see the RSF in particular being portrayed as as chaos agents, as people without a political agenda in a way. But I wonder if you'd be able to comment in the same way that you commented about the SAF's command and control structures. What are the command and control structures of the security systems that are organizing repression, if that is actually being organized? Because we see these horrible videos on social media of people being taken out of jail in the most terrible condition. We know that people are being tortured. On the SAF side, it seems to be often associated with the military intelligence, but what about the general intelligence? What about the police? The police were apparently recently involved in continued torture of the teenage activist Mohamed Adam Tupac. And then what about the RSF? Do the RSF do have detention facilities? Presumably they have torturers. How do you think those are organized? I think that it's a big question because the torture centers and the torturers are in a way, the way that these armed actors communicate with the public. They're a very important part of their comms strategy, as it were, that if you don't do what we say, we will do horrible things to you. And it would be very, very interesting, I think, in understanding the political direction of current events to understand the torture system. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
good morning. I just wanted to ask 2 questions. One, if you could please expand on the breakdown in the command of the RSF. What more can you say about that? And the second thing is, once the war is over, it's obvious since the last time in 2019 that the judiciary and the lawmakers and stuff do not have in Sudan the skills to carry out any reforms or any justice as far as people can see. How will people address that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. Three really excellent questions. We also full of valuable observations. Over to you, Mohamed, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Hafiz, for your question about that violations becomes like a culture. And I guess this is right. I agree with you. But this is related to the culture of violence. It is part of what I call is a proxy war normally, or the proxy war tactics used by the Sudan armed forces. If you look at the RSF is actually a replication of Marahil in the war in South Sudan. And Marahil were actually used as the counterinsurgency policy by the Sudanese army in order to quell the rebellion in South Sudan at that time against the SPLM. And if you remember, there is a lot of issues related to even violations amounting to slavery and slave-like practices at that time. So the RSF is actually, and the culture of violence and militias, basically, it is part of and parcel of the Sudanese armed forces war tactics, like fighting by proxy. And if you look at Darfur later in 2003 and after, it is the way the government divided armed groups, for example, in Darfur, and also the signing of peace agreements with different factions. It's also a reflection of the tactics used by the military. But the RSF actually became very now this time the RSF became grow from a militia into a fully fledged army. And now the key issue is the external support and the issue of gold and Wagner Group. And this actually created new dynamics with regard to the operation of militias in Sudan. And this requires really a strategic approach for peacemakers, how RSF militia or paramilitary group to be integrated as part of any security sector reform, which is really was not addressed at the time during the debate, which actually led to the Constitutional Declaration 2019, and also was not part of the Juba Agreement. And I think this is really an important agenda for any successful transition for Sudan. You need to address the issue of security sector reform in order to integrate all these militias and paramilitary groups into one unified army with one objective, which is actually operating under a civilian control. This is an important area, and I guess this is important for that any operation of these armies, they have to be fully under civilian control, and I think this is an important issue. The question posed by Eddie, I think is Eddie is a difficult one, but let me give you some information about the detention centers organized by both parties. In particular, there is, for example, the RSF has in Khartoum, alone has 5 detention centers. In Riyadh, for example, it has 5 detention centers in the intelligence, the general intelligence headquarters, which is previously used to be used by the intelligence. And also they have other 3 locations. Some reports, the last report by Reuters indicated that 5,000 detainees were actually detained in the detention centers. With actually some, for example, in Bahri, there is a detention center, 31 detainees were actually died, and Some died because they cannot receive medical treatment. Others died because they were tortured. Also lack of food and medicine. And also it seems that one of the trends, many who are actually suspected of being like informers from the SAF, or from some of them also from the resistance committees, were actually detained. What is apparent with regard to the detention centers are actually run by the same commanders who used to be part of the old regime. And now there is a version that now this war by the RSF is against the remnants, the flul of the old regimes. And I think this is not correct. If you make a deep analysis about the RSF command operating these detention centers, many of them are actually members of the former regime. For example, the second person after Ghosh, Salah Ghosh, is now running the RSF detention centers. Some field commanders and also part of those who are actually running these detention centers. So it seems that both the RSF and SAF using the same personnel, and most of them are either defected from SAF to the RSF or from RSF to SAF. So I think this is the general direction. I think it is important for accountability, for proper investigation about how any commission of inquiry will deal with such kind of violations. Regarding the judiciary question, Mr. Aziz, about there is a need for a huge reform for the judiciary with regard to the training of justice, in particular with regard to accountability issues, in particular the Commission of International Crimes. There is a need for also massive reform for prosecution office, and also at the level of the institutions, and also at the level of reform on the Sudanese laws. And as I mentioned earlier, these reforms did not take place after the revolution. And I think it has to be an integral part of any constitutional arrangement after the war. Yeah.
I know there was another question on the breakdown on the RSF, but given how little time we have, I'll just take the sorry, we just have to limit ourselves to the two hands that were already up. So apologies to everyone else. So that is Rosen and the gentleman over there. And then we really have to wrap up the session. Yeah, apologies for being under such a strict regime.
Rosalind Marsden, I wonder if I could just ask Professor whether there's any scope for linking the call for compensation to the sort of companies and assets that belong to the RSF and to the SAF, given that they've been responsible for the damage caused. Secondly, you mentioned in terms of identifying those responsible for violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law. On the SAF side, some associated armed groups, and you've specified particularly a couple of the JPA signatories. But I wondered whether it was also important to sort of bear in mind the role of the Popular Defence Force, the NIST Special Operations Department that was dissolved by the transitional government but has now been re-established by Burhan, and obviously groups like the Al-Bara bin Malik Brigade, the other Islamist brigades, Central Reserve Police, etc., in considering sort of whether there's also a systematic and coordinated command structure linked to the SAF side. And just thirdly, I wondered whether the international community should be doing more to highlight the fact that the SAF are protecting and not arresting people like Ahmed Haroun, who are subject to ICC arrest warrants and are clearly being able to roam around freely in the areas controlled by the SAF. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So final question, please.
Okay. Yes, Peter Tesh. I was caught by a comment in the 1994 magazine, which is a supplement of The Economist, about Myanmar, where a quote was, "What do we do with all these young men running around with guns when the war is over?" And that is not a theoretical point. One knows that after World War II, the violent and armed criminality rose up because weapons were all around Europe. We have the problem as well in Northern Ireland, still of a legacy question of the Troubles. The British government has decided, against the will of the Irish government, that they will not do any more prosecutions about what they call legacy crime from the Northern Ireland Troubles. So this is not only a Sudan issue, this is a worldwide issue. What to do and the kind of justice and peace, And that should be kind of kept in mind, because what happened also in Northern Ireland is one set of victims doesn't recognize the other set of victims, And then, of course, then we have never peace. That's.
Thank you again. Two very good questions. I'll leave it to Mohamed to answer them within 5 minutes.
Yes. Thank you for your generosity, Lutz. Yes, linking the issue of reparation, Rosalind, to SAF and RSF, I think is important, because really we need somebody to, as you said, to fulfill, to pay for such kind of crimes. And I think this is supposed to be part of the political discourse. And I cannot see that political actors are really looking in this area, the area of reparations. And especially for not only individual reparations, but also compensation for infrastructure lost, in particular, for example, academic institutions, health sector, there is massive destruction, and also for private business. And I think the money can come from those who are actually responsible for the war. And this is why I mentioned that there is a need for independent investigation about what actually led to the war and who's actually responsible. And even in legal terms, you need to establish, for example, the civil liability. Those who are actually cause such kind of damage, they have to be held responsible. And this requires a discussion to be part of any peace arrangements about this. And I mentioned the issue of the trust fund. It has to be part of such kind of discussion. And also the RSF companies and also the army companies. They have huge income, and I think this also requires some kind of more investigation about the wealth and the money accumulated by these groups, in part, and also foreign complicity. And in this respect, actually, it's important to link this with UNICAT, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, because all these resources were actually embezzled and taken, and now in foreign accounts. And I think this is an important area need to be investigated, need to be looked at. Particularly Sudan is actually part of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And this requires asset recovery and also cooperation from other states in order for these assets to be returned back to Sudan. So I think this is an important area, and I hope that it will be addressed. You mentioned, yeah, you are absolutely right about Juba Agreement, some forces, and also Nice, now revived and fighting with SAF, and Al-Barra also, and also the Central Reserve military groups are also part of supporting SAF. I think, I'm sure that there is close coordination. In particular now, it seems that SAF changed the tactics from a direct confrontation to urban warfare, using militias like Al-Barra militia, as the majority are actually the main component of them is actually Islamist, in order to fight an urban counter-insurgence war inside Khartoum and also other towns. The problem with these groups, they actually now have their own stakes in Sudan after the war. And maybe they will be able to dictate the political agenda for any constitutional arrangement. And I think this is an area for civil society also to look at that. Those who are actually victorious after the conflict should not be dictate the agenda, and most of them are remnants of the old regime. The final question related to the legacy crimes. And I think this is an important area related to peace and justice. Peace versus justice, which one comes first? In Sudan, really there is no genuine discussion about transitional justice, because peace and justice has to be dealt with in a package related to transitional justice project. And one of the key failures of the previous government, Hamdok government, and also the political parties, they did not adopt a viable transitional justice model for Sudan. Balancing the issue of peace and justice. And there's many writings, literature about this area, but there is a lack of political will. And there is a real need for historical, when I say historical deal, it is important to be done how we are going to deal with the legacy of the RSF, for example. And how are we going to deal with, for example, Burhan and al-Bashir. And there is a need for a genuine political project to be adopted by Sudanese in order to how to balance peace and accountability. And there is proposals written by academics and also some leaders in civil society organizations. But the problem is that political parties were not able during the transition period to propose a clear agenda, like actually what happened, for example, in Northern Ireland. We need like a discussion, really genuine, in order to move Sudan from such kind of legacy towards peaceful, sustainable, and democratic Sudan. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that was a perfect note to end the session on. Thank you so much for all your contributions from the floor, and thank you so much, Mohamed, for giving us a lot of food for thoughts and plenty of insights about the legal system and the challenges when it comes to accountability and justice. So thank you.
Thank you.